We next have our executive interview, and this is where we select an inspiring executive to spotlight. This year, we are thrilled to have Lisa Earnhardt here, Executive Vice President of Abbott Medical Devices. Kate Garrett, yes. And we also have Kate Garrett, Managing Partner of Sonder Capital, who will be introducing and interviewing Lisa. Both, I might add, are Stanford Biodesign alums.
Well, I will clarify, Lisa would be a very distinguished alum, but she has been more of a faculty member at Stanford Biodesign.
But I am an honorary alum. That was like, I could just drop it right there. That was like great news on a Friday. Would love to be associated.
Well, Lisa, why don't I just start by saying thank you very much for being here. I know on a personal level, you are somebody that I have admired for a very long time as a leader in our industry, and I know there are many people in this audience that feel the same way, so it's really an honor to have you here today.
Thank you so much, and I have admired you. It's been so fun to see you since I first met Kate in the Stanford Biodesign program, and just what amazing things you've been able to create, including a baby on the way.
Yes.
We will not use telehealth today to deliver the baby.
Well, I was going to say, Kavita is here, and she said she could do it on telehealth, so we're all good.
We're good to go.
So I thought we'd start with a few questions just on the themes of the conference today. And we just wrapped a great panel on the convergence of technology and healthcare. Would love to ask you, in your role at Abbott, how top of mind is this convergence for you? And is there anything that Abbott is doing proactively to take advantage of technological advances, even outside of the medtech field?
Yeah, and I would say it's absolutely top of mind, and that was just a thrilling panel to be part of. I think about, as Abbott, we're thinking about that convergence of health and technology is really going to be giving us the power to what I call the 3Ds. It's digitize, democratize, and decentralize healthcare. And I would say the pandemic has enabled us to really accelerate a lot of the work in this area, a lot of our thinking. We were able to test some things out without some of the constraints. The prior panel was talking around reimbursement and whatnot. What was, there was a little bit of a silver lining during the pandemic, and part of that was with the EUAs and whatnot, we were able to go. Telehealth is a great example, right? I mean, just one example there where we had the vision in our neuromodulation business for people with chronic pain and movement disorders. We had a vision that ultimately, wouldn't it be great, instead of having to come into the office to get their therapy changed, and in this case it's reprogramming an implantable device, you could just do that remotely. Wouldn't that be great? Especially for people who, I'll say like people with Parkinson's disease, or was just thinking about that because of Kate here, people who might live 200 miles away. And so to be able to come into a care center, especially during a pandemic, the healthcare institutions were the last places you wanted to be, right? And so we were actually able to accelerate, and then we actually introduced the first ever virtual clinic so that we could actually, from the comfort of individuals at home, be able to reprogram their devices. And it's the first of sort of many things. So that's just one example. I think about like decentralizing care, moving it out of the four walls of the clinic and the hospital. So this is obviously an area of passion for mine. There's a lot of things. Just this morning, I think about the 2 calls I had before I came here. One was with my biowearables team, and we're in the process of working on a consumer biowearable line called the Lingo product. And this is taking our proven sensor technology that we use for people with diabetes for continuous glucose monitoring. And this is using this for applications for consumers, health, wellness, fitness. It's called Lingo because it's really learning the language of your body. So as I think about, where technology is going and really that convergence, I think it gives us a great opportunity to move beyond how we're using technology today to really manage what I call like sick care, right? A lot of things we do. I think about the conditions I treat: cardiovascular, diabetes, chronic pain, movement disorders. It's patients who have, debilitating, costly conditions, and we have amazing therapeutics to be able to help them. but couldn't we intervene earlier and it really transition to well care or really health care? So obviously excited about that. So as I think about the 2 calls I had, I mentioned one was with my consumer biowearables team, and my second one was my new head of digital solutions. So it is front and center.
Good to know you're on it.
Yeah, well, not nearly as on it as this group beforehand. That was amazing.
So you mentioned some tailwinds during COVID with telehealth and reimbursement. We also had a panel this morning on rapid diagnostics, and of course there were some tailwinds during COVID from that. And Abbott really played a very public role in that. And while I know diagnostics does not technically fall under your purview, would love to know, as a leader of Abbott, if there are any learnings or benefits from the advances during COVID that you think might be applied to other areas as we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things, one of which is structural in that we've shown that consumers are willing to consume healthcare in their homes. I mean, early on in the pandemic, it was all about PCR testing. And it's amazing how much we all learned about testing, right? Many of us aren't in the diagnostic fields, but overnight you were an expert on, do you have an antigen test? Or, I mean, it was incredible how smart everyone got on it very quickly. And I think no one really thought and imagined that it could just be done in the comfort of your home or in the car on, before you head into a party, what have you. Like, that is life-changing for people, to be able to give them the power to not have to wait on the healthcare system, wait on the hospital system, which, as you know, in the heat of the pandemic was incredibly slow and backlogged, right? So I think that, like, structurally, that is really encouraging that consumers are willing and able to do that. And then I think the second thing is Abbott. One of the things that really came through during the time of the pandemic, I mean, we developed over, I think, 10 or 11 different COVID tests, depending on the need, right? Because sometimes you did need a different test or antibody test, et cetera. It was the speed in which we were able to do things. And the speed of decision making, and I think that came through a little bit. Like, there wasn't a lot of faxing happening in the. I think Kavita had mentioned that, like, a lot of healthcare is done by fax. We had no time to wait for a fax during the pandemic, and so what was so encouraging is that when the need was there, we were able to, stand up to the mission and make things happen. And I think that is an industry in healthcare. I mean, certainly at Abbott, but I think all of us did just remarkable things at the time of crisis. And I think that's really encouraging because the pandemic is obviously still here and the healthcare crisis is still here. So there's a reason there's so many talented, bright, incredible leaders here in this room. And it's because we have a lot of work to do.
Okay, great. Well, we also had a very powerful patient keynote this morning, which was so powerful we needed to do an encore for her, which I think is a record now at the MedtechVISION conference. But really talking about access to reproductive care for women. Thinking more broadly, what do you think we can do in the medtech space to break down barriers to access for underrepresented groups, including women?
Yeah. Well, I think that's all of our responsibility. And as I think about sort of med tech, where oftentimes, as an engineer, we oftentimes we geek out a little bit on the technology piece, right? And on the innovation and the breakthroughs. But at the end of the day, what good is technology if people don't have access to it? Yeah. So as I think about what we need to do there, it does start with innovation and how do we design things like access and affordability in mind. I was really thrilled to hear about some of that work that the team was doing earlier on the panel around sort of designing for health equity up front. It's very different than taking a product and sort of saying what is possible, right? So oftentimes engineering teams will be like, we could do this and we could add this feature and we could do this. But at the end of the day, instead of thinking about like what is possible, what is really practical and what can be adopted by the masses? What could we mass produce? I think about our Libre device, which is our continuous glucose monitor for people with diabetes. And going into that, the design mantra was like, make it Fisher-Price-like. Some of you are maybe a little young to have played with Fisher-Price toys, but I think some of you get the gist. It's like, make it really easy, and that's exactly what we did. We made it easy to apply. We made it easy to consume the data. We made it, we made it easy to manufacture, and we mass produce. I mean, to be clear, There's a lot of complexity around that automation and the mass production, but that allowed us to really meet the needs at scale, right? So now we have over 4 million people in the world that use that technology. The first iteration of that was, we weren't able to do that. It was way too complex. And I think sometimes we just can't get out of our own way as it relates to the innovation side. So more is not always more. So I think that's a piece of it, is the innovation piece. But then the other piece is breaking down the barriers. I think the pandemic it illustrated things that were underlying in terms of inequities in healthcare. I mean, they have been there forever. The pandemic just made it, it just was bright lights. And one thing that really struck me is even, in the United States, we oftentimes, when we think about equity and global health equity, you think globally. You think about third world countries, you think, emerging markets. You don't think about, right here in our country. But it was incredible. So I think there's a lot of work that we can and should be doing around, making sure our clinical trials are representative, making sure we're building the pipeline so that people, can be treated by people who talk like them, who look like them, who think like them. There's quite a bit of work yet to be done, but what's, once again, the silver lining is that I think we're all talking about it. Like 10 years ago, I quite honestly wasn't in rooms where we talked about health equity. And whether it be around gender, whether it be around race, ethnicity, religion, that was just not part of the discussion. So I'm encouraged, but also realistic. There's a lot of work to be done.
Okay. I love it. I mean, I have to say, as an R&D engineer by background, we certainly were not talking about access 15 years ago in design.
No.
So I love that that is now a really key criteria for your teams. Lisa, I would love to switch a bit more to your specific background and career. And a couple things I find really fascinating about you. One is you kind of buck some of the norms. So I always say that there's a common belief that companies typically have 3 CEOs, an R&D CEO, early commercial CEO, and then the scale commercial CEO. And you managed to do all of those phases exceptionally well. And the other kind of common belief is that sometimes leaders in startup companies, those skills don't translate as well to leadership at large cap corporations. But you, again, have managed to excel in both of those extreme environments. So I think of you not just as a superwoman, but also kind of a unicorn in our industry. And would love to dive into some of those extremes in your career. So maybe we'll, well, this isn't going way back, but let's go to Intersect ENT, which was, I think, one of your first true startup experiences. And at the time, you had been running a business unit at Boston, and you left Boston Scientific. You left this large corporation to join Intersect, which was a 12-person company at the time. There's a very radical shift.
Yes.
What was the biggest surprise for you going from this large company experience into Intersect?
There were probably a couple of surprises about the company, and then probably a surprise or two about myself. But one of the surprises was just that it was actually earlier than I thought, funny enough. So I think at the time we thought it was a 510K. It ended up being a PMA. It was, the product that had been used in clinical trials. We ended up needing to redesign it, all of those things. And then, oh, by the way, we had 3 months of cash left. But so there were a few learnings, I'll just say. I mean, I knew that like I needed a fundraise. I didn't fully understand like the fact that, Susan Stimson and myself would be hitting the road like 2 weeks after I started and knocking on doors. So I would say there's just a few things around the company that I learned. And then I think a thing about myself was that I really love the roll up your sleeves, being part of something, being, surrounded by engineers and kind of being everything from the CEO to my office was closest to the front door, so I also was receptionist. I oftentimes was one of the latest people there, and I have to say we weren't always so great about putting our dishes in the dishwasher, so I also was janitorial support, so.
This isn't sounding so fun.
Well, to be clear, you really do wear a lot of hats earlier on in a startup, and it was fun, right? I mean, the fact that I was like thrilled to be doing all of those things.
So I love this quote that you've given in other interviews about getting to Intersect and only upon arriving realizing that you had 3 months of runway left.
Yeah.
It was not something you went into it knowing per se. I think a lot of times in our industry, sometimes the more we know, the more risk intolerant we can be. And in this case, not knowing that much served well for you to actually make the plunge. How would you advise somebody who's in a larger corporation, sort of thinking about going into a smaller startup, to make that transition? And should they know more or should they know less?
Yeah, I think this is where, well, don't do what I did is the answer. Naivete worked to my favor, right? Because so I didn't fully understand the whole rounds. I mean, there was disclosure, but I just didn't fully understand what that meant. They had raised a Series A prime, had taken on venture debt. So it wasn't like there was a lot of other options other than to go raise a round, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's, and I had spent time, I thought I understood it, but I didn't really quite understand it. But I think, honestly, sometimes being okay with an uncertainty is a good thing. You're never going to know. I mean, it's the same thing when we diligence companies, right? Like you just think, you think you're going to figure it all out. Oh, I've done this enough times. I've got all the right questions. We've got the right diligence checklist, all those things. And like, oops, wow, I wish I would have known that. And so, you're just never going to be And so the advice would be like, be okay with that. Like, take that risk. And it was absolutely the right career decision for me. And I would not do it any other way. But, there were some learnings.
Yeah.
Eventually I'll figure it out. I'm not sure I have a long enough career ahead of me to actually apply. I think I need hundreds of years of experience to be able to figure this world out because it keeps changing and changing.
So then, of course, the Intersect journey was very successful. It's certainly a great kind of case study in our industry.
Like a 15-year overnight success.
Yes. Just let's focus on the success part, Lisa. And then, of course, you were recruited out of Intersect to come lead Abbott's medical device business, one of the largest businesses in the world in the healthcare space. Transitioning again from, at the time, of course, Intersect was no longer a startup, but still relatively small compared to Abbott. What was the biggest surprise for you in making that reverse transition into a very large company?
Yeah, and I was excited to make the transition. I mean, just because I'd been at Intersect, it ended up being 11 years, and it was just 3 more years since it just got acquired by Medtronic. So it was quite a journey, but I was ready for that next challenge. And as I think about joining Abbott, a big part of it was, the opportunity to make an impact at scale. And then, I think surprise, and I guess it shouldn't have been such a surprise, just given the field that we are so blessed to work in, but it was just the talent through the organization. And I just couldn't have imagined, my team is 35,000 people. And so I'm like, there's got to be some duds as part of that, right? I mean, that's bigger than the hometown I grew up in. And to be clear, there were some folks who I'm glad I'm not in touch with any longer. But honestly, to the person I interact with, and I get an amazing opportunity to travel all over and meet with the teams, and just incredibly committed, focused on the customer, really want to do what's right for patients. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. But are we committed? And do we care? Absolutely. And I think, I had sort of, as a small company CEO, had looked at the big companies, like big bad companies. You get corporate, you sit in your ivory tower, all of those things, and that's not the case at all.
Okay.
So that was a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah. So, having been on both sides of the table, startups and large corporations, from an acquisition standpoint, would love to kind of hear your perspectives. Maybe we could start with, can you baseline for us, what's the Abbott M&A process like? I mean, how many acquisitions have you done since you've joined Abbott? And at what point do you personally kind of see a deal in that process?
Yeah, so in terms of acquisitions, there's only been one significant one that I have done. We've done some smaller technology-based ones since I've been there. Part of which is you have to recognize I joined Abbott about a year and a half, 2 years after we had acquired St. Jude Medical, which was quite a bit of digesting that still needed to be done there. That was an exciting part for me because I felt like we had the right portfolio, we had the right pipeline and the right people to deliver. So I didn't need to go outside for acquisitions. We had a lot, we just needed to execute on them. So we have done one. As I said, we have tremendous growth opportunities within our portfolio. And so it's not a need to do, it's a want to do, in terms of being able to deliver on sort of our, the promise of our portfolio. So as I think about who do we look at it, like, typically deals will come in, they, oftentimes the best deals, they're connected with the business. So those who are in the business, whether it be myself or in each of the individual, I have 7 different business units in one of those. But we do have a team that's dedicated specifically to licensing and acquisition. We also have a team that's dedicated to ventures. And, I work with both teams very closely because we may decide in some cases to go very early stage. Oftentimes when we're doing acquisitions, it tends to be a little bit later stage. But if it's something of interest, I'll take interest pretty early on.
Okay, great. Well, on behalf of the entrepreneurs in the audience, we all know that funding has become a little more difficult to come by.
Why would that be?
I think there's some things going on in the world.
Yeah, what a crazy time. I mean, literally, as I said, like it's been a busy couple of years, but I mean, if we can all lead through this, just imagine the amazing things we'll be able to do the next couple of decades.
Do you see, so you mentioned Abbott hasn't been that active in the last few years. Do you see that changing at all? And, really, I think that's the question on the minds of a lot of entrepreneurs and investors. Will the large caps kind of step into this void and start to be more active, whether it's in investing or in acquisitions?
Yeah. I would say we were very active within our existing portfolio the last couple of years, right? So just recognizing the needs, it was going to be more challenging for the startups that we are invested in to be able to deliver on their milestones in the middle of the pandemic. Little did I realize it would be as challenging, right? I continue to see bridge financings and, we need to get more to be able to get to the milestone we thought we might be able to do a year ago, those types of things. So we have been very active, but probably isn't the kind of active that all of you would necessarily want to be able to see in terms of acquisitions. And I do see in general our industry becoming more active, just as the public valuations sort of adjust and get to where there's more sort of value to be created there with an acquisition. As there aren't as many folks around the table being able to make new investments, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of people who are focusing on their existing investments. So I won't say anything specifically around Abbott, but we're always looking for great technologies. But as I say, there aren't a whole lot of areas that we're fortunate to be in. Cardiovascular, diabetes, chronic pain, movement disorders, like areas that we have great positions. We have a deep understanding. And we think we have a long runway to be able to deliver on the promise.
I heard an interesting stat yesterday from John Norris at Silicon Valley Bank, which is that last year was one of the biggest volume years for IPOs in the healthcare space. We did 30 IPOs. So far this year, there have been 0.
Yes.
So it's a little scary. We got really hoping those large caps
well, I can tell. So when we took Intersect public, this was in 2014. The year before, there were 2 medtech IPOs.
Wow.
And there had been 0 or 1 for the previous 6 years.
Wow.
And so it was, and I remember we're like, 2 points make a line. The window's open, let's go. But yeah, I mean, that's just like, it's the ebbs and flows of it all. And it will all be fine. I just think you have to, cash is king. Things become, a little different in this environment, but honestly, it's all things that, as good entrepreneurs, you should be focused on anyway, even in my business, right? Because, with, let's just pretend we're heading into a recession. Try that on for size, right? Things like elective procedures or procedures that could potentially be delayed for some time, likely will be delayed if it really gets to that point. And so we all need to be prudent about where we're using our precious resources, whether that be people or money.
Yeah, it's very wise. And thinking again, maybe not just at Abbott, but sort of your experience overall at large companies, in terms of when is the right time for them to buy a technology? Is there a right time? Does it need to be, at a certain point of being proven, whether it be technically, clinically, through regulatory hurdles or commercially, that you think, is the right stage for a company to roll into an Abbott or a Boston?
All right, really unsatisfactory answer would be it depends. Honestly, I was thinking about that earlier as I think it was Leslie was talking about reimbursement, and I remember that being like, oh, well, it depends. And I'm like, that's so frustrating. It's like sometimes my lawyers say that. So, sorry about that. I know I have a couple of my lawyers here today. So it really does though. So like sometimes we'll say like, hey, we really, we have a lot of expertise on the clinical side, so we want to be able to run that pivotal trial. Or if we're saying, hey, we actually don't know the area all that well, we'd rather wait till it's fully de-risked. We think it's got a fair amount of risks ahead of it. We'd rather, clinical risk, regulatory risk. We feel like the commercial risk is probably less of a issue for us, right? Because we're pretty darn good at that.
Yep. Okay, great. Well, shifting a little bit and trying to tie into the Farrelyn Powell Award earlier, with Farrelyn being known very much as an authentic leader herself. And I know authentic leadership is something that's really important to you and something that's admired by many people that know you. Can you tell us, what does it mean to be the authentic Lisa, besides, of course, that you're a woman?
Yeah. I always think about life. People are like, how did you sort of develop your style? And I was like, well, quite honestly, like, work is hard enough, life is hard enough. Like, just be yourself. I mean, I can't figure out, I don't have any time to do anything else than to be myself, right? So, I mean, that's just part of it. It's just like, honestly, out of necessity. And I don't want to be one person in one setting, another person in another setting. I'm just me, like, for better or for worse. And, I think I've had the luxury now, as I've gotten more senior in the industry and my roles, that I feel more comfortable in my skin to be able to do that. I would say I didn't always feel that way. But I think part of it is just being true to yourself, whatever that is, and not pretending to be someone else.
So going back to the fact that you've seen every stage of development and been a corporate leader at each stage, R&D, kind of early commercialization, later stage, do you have a favorite stage of company?
That's not fair. The stage, of course, that I'm in today.
Yes,
yeah. That's the right answer. Yeah.
Just Abbott. That's the answer to all the questions. Yeah. I love Abbott.
Exactly. They're all good. And for me, a big part of it is just the learning, right? The fact I'm like a lifelong learner, and I think you really have to be in our industry because things change so rapidly. And I think that's for me. That's where I think I've done a lot of different things career-wise. And as my dad says, like, you really can't keep a job, can you? But part of which is like so like back in my days at Guidant, like every 1.5 to 2 years, I would take on a new job. But even like at Intersect, I was there 11 years as a CEO, same job. But it was actually like 4 or 5 different jobs, depending on the stage, like from the, being the receptionist to being the public company CEO. It was kind of a range in between.
Yeah, you should put all of those, in under the Intersect title on your resume.
Early stage. Yeah.
So I guess we have a tradition at MedtechVISION in the executive interview to ask, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Time travel. Oh. Yeah. So I'll give you a little story here. And I probably, if I could time travel back. So this is back to February 4th, 2007. I was on stage, just about as pregnant as Kate, speaking to my my national sales organization. I was head of sales at Guidant Cardiac Surgery at the time, or maybe I was running the business. I remember thinking I needed to be at the meeting. And I think about like, what would I tell myself? It was probably like, get off the stage, your water is about to break. And it literally did. And my husband and my
on stage?
Like 3 hours later. And so let's just hope Kate gets it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like time travel to go back and say, oh, Lisa, do this, or just to be able to kind of do as much as I would like to do, because I'm pretty ambitious. I have a fair amount of energy, and I have a lot of things I'm interested in doing, whether it be for fun, for fitness, with friends, work, all kinds of things. So I wish I just had more hours in the day.
So you would be just time traveling back and forth in the last like 30 to 40 years, not like 200 years ago.
Yeah, it would be within my life probably. I mean.
Okay. So
I'll work more on that superpower, Kate.
No, I mean, that one's pretty
I'm sure
cool.
there's people in this world who could probably actually deliver upon that, right?
Yes. I think time travel is very cool.
Yeah.
And you could change your mind. I mean, if you're traveling forever for the next centuries, you could maybe go back later if you wanted.
Yeah, I know, exactly. That's the benefit of it.
So I know we have a lot of women in the audience who are at various stages of their careers, but certainly still aspiring to greater heights. What is the biggest piece of advice and this is our last question, because I know we're out of time here, but what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to the women out there who are still aspiring to maybe heights like where you have already achieved?
Yeah, I would say first, trust yourself and believe in yourself, because you're in the room, you're at the table for a reason. And I think that's probably the most important thing, and hard to hard to do, and like really trust that instinct, and then take risks. Like when I went to Intersect, I didn't know what I didn't know, and as it turned out, it worked out. Not quite as planned, but it's worked out. My career's worked out pretty well as it's turned out. So I think being willing to take those risks and to really stretch yourself.
I think that's quite the understatement, Lisa, that it's worked out quite well. But well, that is great advice. So on behalf of everyone, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
And thanks all of you. I'm so thrilled to be able to be here with you today. I look forward to grabbing a cocktail later when the program wraps up. Thank you much.